Headlights cut through the darkness at 5:58 a.m. A familiar sound followed by the unmistakable crunch. Mailbox number 4 had met its end. Again. But this time, I wasn't fixing it. I was preparing payback. From my bedroom window, I watched the black SUV calmly reverse and drive off, as if it hadn't just mangled another mailbox. Ronta decked in pearls, power suits, and more self-importance than a reality show. Judgia had no clue she was about to step into a carefully laid trap. She might reign over our neighborhood whole like a queen in a cul-de-sac castle, but I'm no ordinary resident. I design cinematic disasters for a living, and in my world, some things don't just fall apart, they strike back. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and let me know if you've ever dreamed of teaching a bossy hoe queen a lesson, because trust me, this story, it's about to go full Hollywood. 3 months ago, I moved into the house I inherited from my grandparents on Willowbrook Court. It's a picture-perfect suburb, wide fences, manicured lawns, and rules so strict they make boot camp look like summer camp. At first, life was peaceful. I spent my days in the garage building props and effects for movie productions, surrounded by the quiet comfort my grandparents had cherished. Then came Ronta like a Category 5 hurricane in designer heels. The first mailbox massacre happened on a calm Monday morning in early September. A jarring metal on concrete screech jolted me awake. I rushed to the window just in time to catch a glimpse of the black SUV disappearing around the corner. My freshly installed mailbox lay contorted on the pavement, a sad sculpture of twisted aluminum and disappointment. I assumed it was a distracted driver, maybe a kid being reckless or someone texting behind the wheel. Stuff like this happens, right? No big deal. I hit the hardware store that afternoon, grabbed a new box, and set it up. Then came Rhonda like clockwork. 30 minutes after installation, she knocked, concern painted across her face, a gold HOA president badge pinned to her blazer like she was the sheriff of neat lawns and beige paint palettes. She was probably in her 40s, with overly styled blonde hair that screamed wind tunnel and a smile that never made it to her eyes. Beside her stood a clipboard-clutching man she introduced as Derek Moss, the HOA vice president. "Oh, Caleb, I heard about your poor mailbox. What an unfortunate accident," she said, trying to peek past me into the house. "I hope you're okay. Nothing like this ever happens here." So unusual. The way she emphasized unusual made it sound like I had brought some kind of curse upon their pristine paradise. Then came the questions. What my work schedule was like, if I had visitors often, any plans to remodel. "We just want to help new neighbors blend in," she explained sweetly. "Some folks settle in easily, others need a little direction." 2 weeks later, mailbox number 2 met a similar fate. Same time, same direction, same crumpled remains. A pattern was beginning to form. Still, I told myself it was probably just coincidence, or maybe someone had a grudge against whoever lived here before me. So I replaced it again, but this time, I added a basic security camera, nothing fancy, just enough to catch a license plate if things got ugly again. Ronta's next visit lacked the earlier charm. She noticed the camera and immediately asked if it was HOA approved. "It's just for security," I said. She gave a slow, calculating nod, like mentally filing away the tidbit. "Of course, safety is important. Just make sure it's not aimed at other houses. We value privacy around here," she said, handing me a massive HOA rulebook thicker than a legal thriller. The third incident took place on a crisp October morning. This time, I was ready. At exactly 5:58 a.m., the black SUV crept up the street, paused to line up perfectly, then accelerated straight into my mailbox with the precision of a Hollywood stunt driver. Shrapnel scattered across my lawn, but now I had video, and more importantly I saw the license plate. It matched the SUV parked in the driveway of the largest house on the block, Ronta's house. I spent the rest of the day reviewing the footage and cross-referencing notes. Every other Monday, same time, same method. This wasn't random, it was deliberate. A calculated series of attacks disguised as clumsy accidents. But why? We barely knew each other. Our conversations had always been short and superficially polite. Then I remembered something. During our first talk, she had asked if I was single, casually mentioned a local coffee spot, and floated the idea of grabbing a drink sometime. I politely declined it, said I was busy with work and still settling in. Her smile had faltered for the briefest second before snapping back into place. When she returned after mailbox number 3's untimely demise, I studied her carefully. She walked around the wreckage like it was a sculpture she'd commissioned, snapping pictures from every angle for the HOA records. She noted how the accidents only ever happened to my mailbox, and suggested maybe I move it somewhere less exposed. I pointed out it had been in the same spot for 30 years without issue. Sometimes change brings unexpected consequences, she said, and walked off. That evening, I sat in my garage-turned-workshop, surrounded by Hollywood-grade materials. Out west, we build illusions that crumble safely and fragile-looking creations that withstand explosions. Staring at the heap of aluminum remains, I realized it was time to bring my work home. If Ronta wanted to play demolition derby with my property, so be it. But this time, the wreckage wouldn't be one-sided. I held up a tiny black paint chip I'd pried from the last destroyed mailbox under the light. It was a flawless match for her SUV's bumper. She had no idea what was coming. I opened my laptop and got to work not on another mailbox, but on something far more satisfying, a trap. Monday morning arrived like clockwork. At 5:58 a.m., I stood at my bedroom window, coffee steaming in hand, as Ronta's familiar black SUV rolled down the street with its usual smug purpose. She had no clue I was waiting for her this time, no idea I had captured every single one of her mailbox smash-and-run missions from multiple angles. The collision unfolded just as I'd anticipated: a slow approach, slight alignment pause, then full throttle into mailbox number 5. The crash echoed through the neighborhood like a gunshot, followed by the SUV quietly pulling away like a criminal leaving the scene. But this time, I had it all. Clear footage of Ronta Glass, a HOA president, suburban Tiranta, intentionally ramming her vehicle into my property. Her license plate was visible, her face behind the wheel unmistakable. Even her posture screamed arrogance, the kind only people who believe they're untouchable can pull off. She was about to learn otherwise. Right on schedule, 30 minutes later, she arrived at my doorstep. No Derek this time, no mask of sympathy. She stood in the sunlight like she owned the entire block, that gold HOA badge catching the morning rays, her hair inexplicably flawless for this hour. "Caleb, sweetheart, we need to have a word," she announced, sweeping into my house uninvited like a CEO entering a boardroom. "This mailbox situation is starting to become quite serious." "Serious in what way?" I asked, curious to see how far she'd go with her performance. She perched on my couch like royalty presiding over a court, carefully smoothing her blazer before delivering her sermon. "Well, darling, this neighborhood has rules, standards. Some neighbors adapt quickly, others need a little correction." Her voice carried that smooth, unshakable tone of someone who never expected to be challenged. She questioned me with laser focus. Did I work from home full-time? How often did packages arrive? Was I hosting clients? Did I understand that businesses based out of homes required HOA approval? "Caleb, Derek and I have an obligation to keep this neighborhood running properly, safe, organized, respectable. We simply can't have people ignoring the rules everyone else follows." I watched her carefully, recognizing the act for what it was, a warning disguised as neighborly concern. She was staking her claim, laying down the law, letting me know my continued peace depended entirely on her approval. Ronta had elevated HOA intimidation to an art form and she was proud of it. But what she didn't know was that I'd spent years building traps for movie villains. I understood how to make illusions, and I knew exactly how to make them collapse at the right moment. When her monologue wrapped up with a syrupy line about community values, I smiled. "You're absolutely right, Ronta. Standards matter. Consistency is everything. People should definitely get what they deserve." There must have been something in my tone that made her pause, but only for a second. Her professional grin snapped back into place, and she rose to leave. "I'm so glad we're on the same page," she chirped. "Oh, and Caleb, you might consider relocating that mailbox. These little accidents seem to only happen to yours, and I'd hate to see someone get hurt." The venom in her words was astonishing, as she was admitting to the damage and threatening more in the same breath. After she left, I sat down with the copy of HOA bylaws she had given me. The document was a bureaucratic horror show vague enough to allow absolute control, written in language designed to confuse and overwhelm. Terms like community standards and aesthetic uniformity were so open to interpretation, they might as well have said, Rhonda decides. Lawn height couldn't exceed 3 inches. House colors had to be HOA-approved neutrals. No political signs, no unapproved renovations, no activities that could disrupt the tranquil vibe of the neighborhood. Later that day, I called my neighbor, Betty Chambers, a 70-year-old widow who lived next door and had become something of my HOA survival guide. When I told her about Rhonda's visit, she gave a weary sigh. "Oh, honey," she said, "you've got to be careful. That woman's driven out 3 families in the last 2 years alone. The Johnsons, the Rodriguezes, and those sweet young parents with the twins." According to Betty, Rhonda had a playbook: spot some trivial violation, start stacking fines, and keep going until the target family either surrendered or moved away. Over coffee, Betty showed me her own collection of violation notices, at 23 in total, each more absurd than the last. Grass measured to be 3.1 inches, garden flowers labeled as non-compliant species, her American flag supposedly displayed at the wrong angle. Every infraction came with a fine of $75 to $300 and they piled up faster than anyone could pay or dispute them. "She preys on the ones who won't bow down," Betty said, showing me a thick folder of documents. "New residents get tested. If you pass the submission test, she leaves you alone. But if you push back, even a little, she comes at you like a wrecking ball." She showed me photos of the other families Rhonda had run off. "Their only crime?" questioning her authority in the smallest of ways. That afternoon, Rhonda made her first official move against me. Derek Moss, clipboard in hand, showed up at my door looking more nervous than usual. He handed over a violation notice, a yellow paper, formal language, vague citations. My grass, according to the HOA, measured 3.2 inches tall. The fine? $75, due within 48 hours. That evening, I pulled out a ruler and measured my lawn. It matched the rest of the street blade for blade. But I knew the truth. I wasn't being targeted for tall grass. I was being targeted for standing tall. Not a single other home had received a violation, just mine. I walked the neighborhood that afternoon, snapping photos of every lawn, every car, every paint color I could. Rhonda watched from behind her curtains, her silhouette framed like a general overseeing her territory. She was already planning her next strike in this absurd war of suburban attrition. The notice she'd posted was printed on blinding yellow paper, impossible to miss. She'd taped it dead center on my front door, as if announcing my guilt to the entire community. A scarlet letter of non-compliance. Residents passed by without meeting my eyes. Their silence said everything. "Glad it's not me." The message was clear: submit, or be dismantled piece by piece. That night in my workshop, surrounded by broken mailboxes and even more broken rules, I kept replaying what Betty had told me. 3 families gone, exiled by a woman drunk on the meager authority granted by an HOA title. And more would follow if no one stood up to her. I finally saw it for what it was. This wasn't about a mailbox. It was about control. And she'd picked the wrong guy to try and control. From that moment on, the yellow slips became routine. Every Tuesday morning, like clockwork, Derek Moss would show up, a clipboard in hand, eyes darting nervously, and tack a new violation to my door. Rhonda parked across the street in her black SUV, watching like a prison warden monitoring an inmate. What they were doing wasn't enforcement. It was psychological warfare cloaked in procedural language. By the end of the second week, my door looked like a wall of shame. 5 violations in one morning: unapproved paint tone, grass 0.2 inches above limit, aggressive vehicle positioning, unauthorized use of tools, and the catch-all favorite, failure to adhere to aesthetic standards. Rhonda had dropped the mask. The gloves were off. Week 3 brought more creative accusations. My legally parked car, in the same spot my grandparents used for decades, now allegedly obstructed pedestrian sight lanes. That one cost me $200. Next, I was fined $300 for excessive noise during permitted work hours. The irony? I'd been quietly sanding a jewelry box for a rom-com purple barely louder than a whispered conversation. That's when I stopped reacting and started documenting it like someone who makes a living designing high-precision illusions. I cataloged everything. Photos, timestamps, decibel readings, grass blade comparisons, paint swatch matches. I could prove my grass was identical to the rest of the block, that my shutters were the exact shade listed in the HOA's approved palette, that the sound in my workshop never exceeded 40 decibels quieter than my neighbor's wind chimes. None of it mattered. Ronta had turned the HOA into a weapon. The violations weren't about rule breaking. They were about breaking me. Each new yellow paper felt like a fresh attack. I'd open my door every morning half expecting Anya like a soldier scanning for mines. And always, it was there. Neighbors had started crossing the street to avoid me, not out of malice but fear. Ronta had made me radioactive. Supporting me meant risking being next. One afternoon, Betty slid a folded note under my door. She's been circling your house 6 times a day. Taking photos? She did the same thing to the Martinez family before she forced them out. Be careful. So I started tracking her. I logged every pass she made, every angle she photographed. She wasn't just harassing me, she was compiling a dossier, a case she could build one contrived violation at a time. I decided it was time to push back carefully. I installed a sign in my yard, neutral colors, clean typography, just a single sentence. This area is under active HOA surveillance. Small print outline monitoring compliance, with a few harmless symbols to make it feel official. It was accurate, it was legal, and it was absolutely within the HOA guidelines, which I had practically memorized. Her reaction was immediate and explosive. 2 hours later, Derek knocked, a sweat beating down his temple, holding a notice like it was radioactive. Unauthorized signage displaying unapproved messaging contributes to community discord. Fine, $500. When I pointed out that the sign followed every regulation, Derek sighed. Ronta says the intent violates the community harmony clause. That night, Ronta called me herself for the first time. Her voice was composed, polished, but it carried a tight edge of fury. Caleb, sweetie, let's get one thing straight. We have rules for a reason. When people try to outsmart the system, they try to undermine those of us who've kept this community beautiful for years. It never ends well. She let the silence hang, just long enough to sting. You're already at $1,200 in fines. That may seem steep, but trust me, it can go a lot higher if you insist on playing games. I hung up and did the math. 3 weeks, 7 notices, over $1,000 in invented fines. At this pace, she'd have a lien on my house by August. I called Betty again, asked about the families who'd been driven out. Every story was the same. Fines they couldn't fight, deadlines they couldn't meet. Selling the house became the only option. The next morning, violation number 6 arrived. Landscaping within prohibited setback zone. Fine, $750 plus mandatory removal in 72 hours. It was for the flower garden my grandparents planted 30 years ago. That one landed like a punch to the chest. I spent the afternoon kneeling in the dirt, measuring from the curb, reviewing old survey documents. Those flowers weren't just plants. They were my childhood, summers with grandma, humming with grandpa while laying stones. They were memories. And Ronta had just labeled them non-compliant vegetation. She didn't care about property lines or regulations. She cared about domination. This was personal. And I was done playing defense. Utilization for non-residential purposes. That was the latest offense, printed in fluorescent yellow ink and slapped onto my door like a final insult. I didn't bother hiding my frustration when Derek handed it to me. Tell me something honestly, I said. Do you actually believe any of these violations are real? He glanced around, like Ronta might leap from the hydrangeas with a hidden mic. His voice dropped to a whisper. Look, man, I just follow instructions. I need this on my RA copyright some A copyright A. Ronta knows people on the city council. That night, I sat alone in my workshop, staring at the damage, both financial and emotional. $1,550 in fines, more coming every few days. I had 1 week to pay or face escalated enforcement proceedings, which, in Ronta speak, meant to lean on the house. She'd done it before, turned this hoe into a precision machine for crushing dissent. But this time, she'd miscalculated. She thought I was just another target. She had no idea who I was. In my world of the world of illusions, mechanical trickery, and cinematic sleight of hand, I don't just build things to fall apart. I build them to look like they might break. And then they don't. I make things that survive explosions, collapses, fire. I make miracles. And now, I had a project of my own. If Rhonda wanted a fight, she was about to get one from someone who made a living out of fooling people like her. I looked at the garden, my grandparents' garden, the last trace of them left on this earth. It had been their labor of love. Grandma spent every spring tending roses by hand. Grandpa laid every pathstone himself, creating winding trails through the bed so neighbors could stroll through and admire the blooms. 30 years of care, of Sunday afternoons spent with dirt under our fingernails, humming old songs and laughing in the shade. Rhonda obliterated it on a Thursday morning in November. I watched from the kitchen as she strutted onto my lawn, clipboard in hand, Derek trailing behind her like a oil mutt. They were armed with measuring wheels and digital range-finders, as if surveying a military zone. She didn't hesitate, walked straight into the garden, began pointing, whispering, and then methodically stepping through the flower beds. Not clumsily, not incidentally, deliberately. She crushed the antique rose bushes, the ones that had survived 3 decades of Michigan winters. She kicked aside the small memorial stones Grandpa had engraved with their wedding date. She ground her heels into the daffodil bulbs of vintage heirlooms Grandpa had smuggled across state lines in her suitcase, all while Derek scribbled like a court stenographer. I bolted outside. Rhonda, what the hell are you doing? She looked up, plastered smile in place. Same saccharine tone as always. Oh, Caleb? We're just conducting the inspection listed in your latest notice. These plantings clearly violate the setback zone. It's a safety issue for emergency vehicle access. She gestured toward the wreckage like she was pointing at toxic waste. I know it's disappointing, but regulations are for everyone's protection. Her voice was so calm, so reasoned. It was like listening to someone discuss trash pickup while burning down a church. I dropped to my knees in the dirt, hands trembling, as I picked up broken bits of a stone inscribed with anniversary 1978. My grandparents' legacy lay trampled beneath this woman's heels. That night, I sat by the window, staring out at what was left. For the first time, I considered surrender. I opened a browser tab to search how to forfeit a property to an HOA. I drafted a resignation letter, just a Word doc with the words "you win." I was exhausted, defeated. She hadn't just wrecked a garden, she'd torn out the last living memory I had of the people who raised me. And then, something caught my eye. Grandpa's old gardening book, still on the shelf. I pulled it down, opened it at random. A faded page, dog-eared and soft with age. Tucked between 2 pressed leaves was a note. Grandpa's handwriting, still steady, still strong. We don't plant roses for today. We plant them so someone else can sit in the shade tomorrow. I sank to the floor and cried, but not because I'd lost hope. I remembered why I'd started. These roses are 30 years old, I told her the next morning, trying to keep my voice steady. My grandparents planted them. They've been here longer than half the homes in this subdivision. Rhonda didn't flinch. She was already scribbling on a fresh violation slip. Sentiment doesn't override code, honey. Rules are rules. Derek looked uncomfortably, genuinely uncomfortably for the first time since I'd met him. He kept glancing between the destroyed garden and Rhonda's clipboard like he was trying to make himself vanish into the paper. I looked him in the eye. Do you really think this is necessary? He mumbled something about procedure, eyes fixed on the ground. Coward. But at least he knew what they were doing was wrong. Rhonda held out the newest notice like a trophy. Landscaping violation. Immediate removal required. All non-compliant vegetation must be cleared and replaced with approved ground cover within 72 hours. Failure to comply will result in additional fines and legal action. She surveyed the wreckage with something like satisfaction, like an artist admiring her finished canvas. That afternoon, Betty Chambers appeared on my doorstep, tears in her eyes. I saw the whole thing, she said, holding up her phone. I filmed everything. She caught Rhonda, on video, deliberately crushing plants while pretending to measure. Betty's voice trembled with fury. That garden's in the neighborhood historical registry. Your grandmother used to give garden club tours, 3 counties worth of visitors. Everyone loved those roses. She handed me the phone. I watched the footage, clear as day. Rhonda stomping through flower beds while Derek took notes and pretended not to notice. That night, I stayed out in the garden ruins, salvaging what I could. A few bulbs might make it. A couple of rose bushes could survive, if cut back hard and babied through winter. I worked until midnight, trying to preserve the last fragile pieces. But the truth was, 30 years of quiet beauty of love, history, and roots had been annihilated, because one woman couldn't stand the idea of not being obeyed. And the fines? They had just reached a new high, $2,300. That was the total now. Ronta's final ultimatum arrived like a death sentence: pay in full within 7 days, or face foreclosure proceedings. She'd done this before. It tightened the screws until people either bent or broke. She knew exactly how to break spirits, how to make resistance cost more than surrender. But this time, she'd made a grave mistake. She underestimated me. I called in sick for the next 3 days, locked myself in the garage workshop and began designing something that was more than a replacement mailbox. It was a message, a line in the sand, a trap dressed up as submission. I drafted blueprints, calculated structural tolerances, and placed specialty orders with suppliers I knew from my work in film prop design. These weren't standard materials, so this was Hollywood-grade fabrication. If Rhonda wanted a war, she was about to get a battle scene worthy of a blockbuster. Meanwhile, the neighbors had gone silent. People crossed the street when I passed. Even Betty had stopped waving from her porch. I didn't blame them. They'd seen what Rhonda could do. 3 families before me had tried to stand up to her. All 3 were gone now and moved out or forced into financial ruin under the weight of her weaponized code enforcement. Still, their silence was complicity. Every closed curtain gave her more power. That Sunday evening, I stood in the remains of my grandparents' garden and made them a promise. I remembered all those Sunday afternoons, Grandma showing me the difference between tea roses and floribundas, Grandpa explaining drainage systems and how root rot could kill a garden in weeks. They had created something beautiful, something meant to be shared, and Rhonda had destroyed it for no reason but to remind me who was in control. That night, Betty showed up on my doorstep with a plate of warm cookies and a folder thick with documents. "I've been keeping records on her for 2 years," she said. "Every violation, every target, every abuse of power. I've just been waiting for someone brave enough to fight back." Her hands trembled as she passed me the folder. "That garden meant everything to your grandparents. Don't let her win." I looked at the crushed petals glowing pale in the moonlight. I made another promise, this one to my grandfather. "Rhonda Glass has bullied her last neighbor. Tomorrow, her game ends. And it ends with a bang." Sunday night became strategy time. I laid out the blueprints like a general planning an ambush. Every measurement, every reinforcement was calculated with precision. In Hollywood, props fall into 2 categories: things that break dramatically, and things that survive explosions. I was building the second kind. The foundation came first, a 4 feet deep, reinforced with steel rebar, and poured with industrial-grade concrete. This thing wasn't just a mailbox, it was an anchor, engineered to survive catastrophic impact. I worked in segments, during Rhonda's midday errands and Derek's lunch breaks. To the casual observer, it looked like landscaping repairs, maybe even an effort to comply with all the violation notices. I let the illusion take root. On paper, the mailbox was flawless: exact height, approved materials, regulation setback. I even cross-checked the HOA ordinance and documented every requirement to the letter. But beneath the surface, a tank, a steel core, mounted inside a standard aluminum casing, anchored into concrete, strong enough to stop a small vehicle dead. Rhonda wouldn't see it coming. Her surveillance routine was obsessive. She drove past 6 times a day, always slowing down to snap photos. I mapped her schedule like a military recon team: early patrols at 7:15, lunch loop at 12:40, final sweep at 8:10 p.m. That's when I work Keto, when I was safe from her line of sight. I built by moonlight, hiding pieces in the garage, assembling sections indoors, installing late at night. It was part engineering feat, part magic trick. Derek still came by every morning at 10 a.m. Like clockwork. I scheduled concrete pours for 10:30. The camera system required extra carry multiple hidden units, strategically placed. I designed them to record from several angles, feeding footage to redundant wireless backups. I wanted an airtight record-proof even Ronta's creative storytelling couldn't twist. Betty became my second pair of eyes, positioning cameras from her window. Her vantage point completed the perimeter. By midweek, we had full coverage. Ronta's paranoia was peaking. She started driving past more often, sometimes parking across the street with binoculars, watching my house like it was a hostile embassy. Derek told me she was getting suspicious. Unauthorized construction activity, she'd called it. But my paperwork was airtight. Technically, it was just mailbox maintenance and landscaping. No permits required. Still, the pressure intensified. Every day brought new violations: excessive tool usage during quiet hours, improper storage of construction materials, visual clutter from debris. Each notice came with harsher penalties and shorter timelines. Rhonda was accelerating. She could sense something was coming, she just didn't know what. Then came Thursday's insult of the most ridiculous violation yet: unauthorized memorial display. Apparently, the simple stone marker I placed in memory of my grandparents' garden now required a $300 permit and monthly inspections. She had no shame, no humanity. She was burning down people's lives for sport. That Friday night, I installed the final components. Moonlight glinted off steel as I mounted the last camera, checked the signal transmission, and double-tested the anchors. From the street, it looked like any other mailbox, a suburban, boring, regulation approved. But underneath, an immovable monument, a message Ronta couldn't ignore and couldn't erase. Betty watched from her window as I finished. She flashed a porch light on CR signal. I gave a small nod. Tomorrow, the curtain would rise, and Ronta's show was about to end. Operation Iron Resolve had one active supporter: Betty, the only neighbor brave enough to openly stand against Ronta's reign. "That woman has terrorized this community long enough," she whispered, helping me fine-tune the last camera angles. "Someone needs to remind her that actions have consequences." Saturday morning arrived with theatrical flair. Ronta's final ultimatum, hand-delivered like a royal decree. No Derek this time. She stood on my front porch in full regalia, HOA badge glinting in the sun like a sheriff's star from some twisted suburban western. "Caleb, sweetie," she said, voice syrupy and sharp, "your current violation total is $3,200. Payment is due by Monday morning, or foreclosure proceedings begin." She smiled like a crocodile and added, "I do hope you'll make the sensible choice." I looked at her as standing on land my grandparents had cherished, surrounded by the wreckage of a garden she'd obliterated out of spite. And now she wanted to take everything because I wouldn't bow. "You know what, Rhonda?" I said, eyes steady. "I think Monday morning is going to be very educational for both of us." Something in my tone gave her pause, but not for long. Her plastic smile snapped back into place. "I'm glad you're finally ready to be reasonable," she said as she turned to leave. "Just remember, this community has standards. People who can't adapt usually find it easier to relocate somewhere more suitable." The arrogance was blinding. She truly believed she was untouchable, that her little empire would last forever. Sunday night, 11:47 p.m., the trap was set. Tomorrow, at 5:58 a.m., Ronta Glass would drive into her destiny, and this time, the whole neighborhood would be watching. Monday morning, 5:57 a.m., I stood at my bedroom window, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, recording. The street outside looked calm, peaceful. For now, Betty was stationed at her own window across the street, live streaming to the 12 brave souls she'd gathered over the weekend. The hidden cameras were online, motion sensors armed, wireless backups humming quietly in the background. Then came the sound, the low growl of Ronta's oversized Suva, familiar now, like a villain's theme music. Right on schedule, she cruised into view with the confidence of someone who believed nothing could touch her. The same arrogance she'd driven with for 2 straight months, targeting that same mailbox like clockwork. Only this time, the mailbox was ready. She slowed slightly, lining up her approach like she had 100 times before, then accelerated. 25 miles per hour of HOA fury. And then impact. It was glorious. Physics collided with vengeance in a spectacle of crushed steel and detonating airbags. Ronta's SUV struck the fortress mailbox like a battering ram expecting collapse. What she got instead was reality. The SUV folded around the mailbox like a tin can. The post didn't so much as quiver. Not a dent, not a scratch, just a gleaming monument to well-engineered defiance. It stood, stoic and smug, while Ronta's vehicle crumpled like it had hit a lamppost forged from pure spite and rebar. The hood collapsed instantly. Steam burst from the ruptured radiator. Airbags exploded like thunderclaps, one after another. The engine block buckled backward into the firewall. Her so-called weapon of intimidation had become a smoking, sparking monument to her own downfall. Glass littered the street like diamond confetti. Fluids pooled beneath the wreckage, shimmering with iridescent failure. Ronta sat slumped behind the wheel, airbag pressed into her stunned face, hair standing on end like she'd licked a power outlet. The fortress stood in front of Hera, pristine, victorious, and 100% legal. Through her shattered windshield, she stared at the mailbox as if it had betrayed her personally. She had expected another victory lap. Instead, she got an immovable wall of engineering and retribution. I stepped outside, still recording, calm, controlled, savoring the symmetry of justice. Betty emerged from her front door, narrating to her live stream like a courtroom reporter at a public execution. "You're witnessing justice, folks. This is what happens when you push people too far. If you've ever had an HOA president abuse their power, share this video." Neighbors began stepping out of their homes, drawn by the noise, by curiosity, by the scent of Ronta's overdue reckoning. Phones in hand, recording, watching. The rain of Ronta glass was ending in real time. She stumbled out of her wrecked SUV, eyes wide with disbelief. This mailbox is illegal," she sputtered. You set me up. This is a trap." I raised my phone slightly and smiled. "Actually, Ronta, this is compliance." Ronta's voice cracked under the pressure, panic rising as she realized the full scope of what was happening. Dozens of phones recording her meltdown from every angle. The woman who had ruled our neighborhood through fear and fines was now facing something she had never encountered: the consequences. She didn't know how to handle it. "Actually, Ronta," I said calmly, phone still recording, "it's just really well built. I used proper engineering principles and quality materials, you know. Standards." The irony landed hard. She had spent months preaching about community standards while trampling every standard of human decency. Now she stood, disheveled and defeated, in the rubble of her intimidation campaign, literally and figuratively. Just then, Derek arrived late, as usual, only to stop dead at the scene. He took in the wreckage, the crowd, the cameras, and without a word, turned and walked away. The man wasn't brave, but he was smart enough to recognize the end of an era. By that afternoon, Derek would quietly resign from the HOA board and swear he had never supported Ronta's vendettas. Ronta, spinning in circles, shouted, "Everyone stop recording. This is private property. You can't film me without permission." But we were on a public street, documenting what appeared to be a traffic accident. Her screeching only made her look more unhinged. Neighbors who had never even made eye contact with me before approached, offering witness statements, video footage, and quiet pats on the back. Betty's live stream was exploding, the comments flying in from people sharing their own HOA nightmares, cheering on the mailbox, and asking for blueprints. Within the first hour, the #mailboxrevenge was trending across the metro area. Local news stations started calling. The evidence was airtight, multiple camera angles showing months of targeted harassment, property destruction, and now, a fiery conclusion of her own making. Ronta had, without realizing it, created a perfect documentary of her downfall. As EMTs and firefighters began arriving to handle the wreckage, I looked at her one last time. "You know what, Ronta, I never wanted this. I just wanted to live quietly in my grandparents' house. You started this with the first mailbox. I'm just finishing it." The woman who destroyed 30-year-old memorial gardens and forced families from their homes was finally facing someone who didn't flinch. As the tow truck hooked up her crumpled SUV, something struck me. For the first time in months, The neighborhood was silent, no roaring engines, no paper threats, no fear, just the sound of justice being served on a bed of shattered glass and twisted metal. Within 6 hours, the video had gone viral. Betty's live stream, my phone footage, and a dozen neighbors' recordings became a feature-length chronicle of suburban resistance. People from all over began sharing their own horror stories and requesting detailed instructions for constructing their own mailbox fortresses. By evening, local news picked up the story. The segments were brutal and beautifully titled, "Mailbox Meltdown, HOA President Implodes, Suburban Justice." One man Ronta's insurance company denied her claim within 48 hours. Intentionally ramming a vehicle into a mailbox, no matter how overbuilt, wasn't covered under any policy they'd ever written. The video made the decision easy. Now she was staring down the total loss of her vehicle, medical bills from the airbags, and the looming threat of civil suits from nearly every household she had targeted. Her kingdom was crumbling even faster than her SUV's front end. That Friday, a special emergency meeting was held at the community center. The turnout was massive, bigger than anything since the chilly cook-off of '89. Residents who had lived under Ronta's boot for years finally felt safe to speak up. One by one, the stories came out. Betty took the floor with a slideshow of organized evidence, spreadsheets of fines, video clips of intimidation, letters of forced compliance. "She fined us $2,000 for painting our mailbox the wrong blue," testified the Williams family, "but 4 other houses had the same shade. When we pointed that out, she said ours was aggressively blue and gave us 1 week to pay or face foreclosure." The crowd laughed bitterly. Others nodded. Then came the Martinez family. "She made us cut down a 50-year-old oak tree," they said, claimed it violated sideline rules, and never mind, the tree had been here since before the subdivision existed. And the Johnsons? They lost their home because their twin toddlers made excessive noise in their own backyard, during legally permitted hours. Story after story poured out, a mosaic of pain and injustice. Years of fear, fines, and forced relocations laid bare under fluorescent lights and righteous fury. The stories were heartbreakingly consistent to manufactured violations, escalating fines, and economic sabotage. Ronta's rule had followed a playbook of fear and control, but the neighborhood had finally woken up. She made one last, desperate bid to hold on to power. Ronta marched into the emergency home meeting clutching a briefcase stuffed with legal documents and threats. "She accused me of constructing a deliberate booby trap to harm her, demanded investigations into conspiracy and property damage, and dramatically waved around folders like they were loaded weapons." But no one was intimidated anymore. She was no longer a feared enforcer, just a petty tyrant with a gold badge and a crumbling reputation. Her performance landed with a dull thud. The room, filled with her former victims, had seen behind the curtain. The wizard was nothing more than a frightened woman with no magic left. The vote of no confidence passed unanimously. All 47 households voted to immediately strip Ronta of her HOA powers, revoke her authority to issue violations, and install a new leadership team that actually cared about the community. Derek, ever the opportunist, had already resigned via email, citing philosophical differences with the board and a renewed focus on his city council campaign. No one missed him. Betty Chambers was elected HOA president by unanimous acclaim. Her platform was simple: common sense, compassion, and community service. Her first act in office, she voided every violation Ronta had issued over the past 2 years, canceled all associated fines, and implemented an appeals process for anyone who felt they'd been unfairly targeted. The change was swift and glorious. Within weeks, Ronta's house went up for sale. Without a car, without allies, and completely socially exiled, she had no reason or ability to stay. Former cronies ghosted her. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid her. She was even banned from the local grocery store after an unhinged rant about deep state HOA conspiracies. She wasn't feared anymore. She was pitied and ignored. But that mailbox, that glorious, steel-willed mailbox, it had become something more than just a piece of infrastructure. It had become a symbol, a testament to the idea that when you plant roots deep and build strong, no tyrant, no matter how shiny her badge, can uproot what's right. Kids asked their parents about the mailbox that fought back, New families moving in requested tours. The legend of the fortress mailbox spread. I started getting calls from other neighborhoods asking for consultations on defensive landscaping and anti-Karen infrastructure. Apparently, I'd sparked a movement. 6 months later, I was planting new flowers in the freshly restored memorial garden when a young couple knocked on my door. They'd just moved into Ronta's old house. With them were 2 small children who immediately ran to the mailbox and started peppering me with engineering questions. "Can you teach us how to build one?" the father asked, nodding toward the fortress. "Our last HOA president made Ronta look tame. We want to be ready next time." That's when it hit me. Ronta's legacy wouldn't be fear, it would be resilience. A generation of people learning how to stand up for themselves and build stronger communities. Literally, under Betty's leadership, the HOA turned into something people actually liked. They organized block parties, they landscaped shared spaces, they handled disputes with conversations instead of citations. Property values rose for the first time in years. Families moved in, not out. Willowbrook Court became what my grandparents had always dreamed it could be. I still drink my morning coffee by the bedroom window, but now I'm watching children walk to school instead of preparing for suburban warfare. The garden blooms again every spring, tended by neighbors who remember my grandparents and cherish the story of what we built and what we reclaimed. Sometimes, justice doesn't show up in a courtroom. Sometimes, it arrives with the sound of crumpling steel, and the sight of a bully finally getting exactly what they deserve. The fortress mailbox still stands at the edge of the property, gleaming in the morning light like a monument, not just to good engineering, but to community courage. A permanent reminder that bullies only stay in power as long as good people stay silent. And here, in Willowbrook, the age of silence is over. Drop your stories in the comments if you've ever dealt with a neighborhood tyrant, and remember, sometimes, the best defense isn't retaliation, it's just building something stronger than the person trying to tear you down. The stories where reality feels like fiction and fiction wishes it was this juicy. Smash that like button before the next bombshell drops.